You're listening to the Business Wealth Impact Podcast, your source for empowering information and cutting-edge ideas from the world's top minds. I'm your host, Jeanne Amlour, founder of seven-figure coaching company, Jeanne Amlour International. Join me on a journey to unleash your potential and create your highest success. Welcome to Business Wealth Impact. Hello and welcome to another wonderful episode of Business Wealth Impact. Today, our guest is David Barnett. David has been helping small businesses for over 20 years to grow and to buy and sell them. David is also the author of 8 books about small business transactions and local investing. He also has a super successful YouTube channel, and he has a blog called davidcbarnett.com. Welcome, David.
Hey, Jeanne. Good to meet you here today. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, exactly. So, David, we want to talk everything about how to buy small businesses.
Okay. It's a big topic.
Big topic, and there's a lot of ins and outs. There's a lot of people doing things wrong. There's a lot of people getting bad deals. So I want to really pull back the curtain on how do we go about buying a small business.
Sure. Absolutely. So let's start with just talking about who on earth would sell a small business. And here's one of the biggest things that I want to get across to everyone is that small businesses sell for relatively low multiples of their cash flow. And if you've ever done any public stock market investing, you know that sometimes they talk about a share price with a price earnings ratio is sometimes how they talk about it. You know, that company is selling for 20 times earnings or something like that. Similarly, in the world of small business, we talk about what businesses are selling for as a function of their cash flow. I'm going to put an asterisk there because cash flow should not be confused with profit, because in this world, people talk about something called seller's discretionary earnings. It's not really the profit of a business. It's what we could call a budget. So this is out of this number. And so this is what business brokers will put out there. They'll say, hey, I've got a business for sale with a seller's discretionary earnings of $200,000, for example. Out of that 200 grand, here's what you have to do. Number one, you got to take a salary home for yourself or a person you might engage to be the manager. So that money out of there, you got to pay someone to actually run the business, whether it's yourself or somebody else. You got to service your debt. You got to pay your taxes. You have to do what's called CapEx, because the way that they get that seller's discretionary earnings, they add back amortization and depreciation. So if the business uses any degree of equipment or machinery that will need to be replaced, that's going to come out of your cash flow. And you need to get a rate of return on the cash you put down to actually buy the business. So when you hear that list of things, you can imagine that 200,000 starts to seem very meager, right? Because you got a lot of things to come out of there. So when you know that seller's discretionary earnings, you might multiply that by 2.5, 3 times, maybe a little bit more in some industries. You realize very quickly that's not a heck of a lot of money. So who on earth would sell their business for such a meager amount? And the answer is only someone that needs to. So the reason why small businesses ever go up for sale is never, ever, ever cashing out. That's why Mark Zuckerberg sells his shares in Facebook, so he can cash out. It's not the same for small entrepreneurs. Small entrepreneurs put their business up for sale for one of 5 reasons. The first one is what I call the mental bucket: burnout, boredom, and fatigue. So they're exhausted by the business. It stresses them out. They just don't want to deal with it anymore. They say, I've got to move on to something else, so it goes up for sale. Then there's divorce, poor health, the need to relocate, and the last one is retirement. So from that list of 5 things, only one of them, in fact, is ever planned for, which is retirement. The other things are just stuff, unfortunately, that happens to us in the run of life. And so when people are afflicted by one of these things, they will then say, I need to sell my business, and the business will then go up for sale. The question then is, are you as a business buyer going to be available to that business owner at that moment in time to be able to have a conversation with them and make a deal? And so if they don't know anybody that wants to buy their business, the other option that they can do is they can go to one of these online websites where they can list their business for sale, or they can contact someone like a business broker who helps people sell businesses. And what the business broker is going to do is they're going to prepare some documentation and they're going to advertise that business for sale, hopefully trying to draw someone in that might have an interest in that business. Now,
Mm.
Interesting statistic. One of the biggest online websites actually puts out a report of statistics from their website. And did you know 80% of what they list for sale never sells?
I figured that because I see some, they're there forever.
Yeah. So why is that? There's two big reasons. One is that the seller has a completely outlandish notion of what their business is worth, and they're asking
Right.
literally double what anyone could ever afford to pay for it.
Mhm.
And they have not
Mhm.
even looked at it to the point of degree of asking themselves, if I was the person buying this business, how would I organize this deal?
Right.
They haven't even asked themselves that. So I
Mhm.
put these sellers into the group of what we call aspirational sellers. They almost
Mhm.
always ask, a weird round figure like $1 million for their business, right?
Mhm.
And so that's one group of problems, people. The other reason why a lot of these businesses don't sell is that the business is not in a state that makes it transferable to a new owner. So there's not the
Mm.
processes and systems, or maybe everyone does business with the company because they all know the owner personally, and that's the
Mhm.
main point person in the company, and everyone's talking to that person. And you might look at the numbers on paper and think this is a good deal for me, but then when you get to understand how it operates, you say, hey, I don't know if the customers
Mm.
really will follow me when I become the owner,
Mhm.
and so that's going to make you not want to buy that business. So
Mhm.
that's what happens, right? And we also
Mm.
know through looking at the market that the majority of businesses that actually do sell do not end up going through any intermediary at all. So
Mm.
think about this. If you have a Ford dealership, for example, and the owner suddenly wants to sell, who is the likely
Mhm.
buyer of a Ford dealership? It's probably other Ford dealers, right?
Yes.
And that Ford dealership owner already knows those people through his associations with the industry and meetings that they go
Mhm.
to, and et cetera, et cetera. So if something happens, that business owner knows a likely pool of potential buyers. And that's the problem with the market for small businesses, is it's very easy for you or I to identify a business. Businesses want to be seen. They even advertise, right, to make themselves
Mhm.
noticeable, right? So
Mm.
people in the public can see businesses, but it's impossible for a business owner to look out their front door and see and identify people who might want to buy their business, because all they
Mhm.
see is the market of people. And so it's a question
Mm.
of dealing with this opacity or lack of transparency in the market. So
Mhm.
one of the strategies that people will often use if they want to buy a business is they will conduct what's called a proprietary search. So in order to do this, the very first thing you have to do is actually figure out, what kind of business do I want to buy? So you
Mhm.
might say to yourself, I would like to own, I don't know, a bakery, a wedding cake bakery,
Mhm.
for example. And if you said, I
Mhm.
live in Los Angeles and I want to own a wedding bakery in Los Angeles, well, holy smokes,
Mhm.
all you need now is like a copy of the Yellow Pages, or you need to do a Google search,
Right.
and you can easily
Mhm.
create that list, right? And then
Mhm.
you need to go out and actually find out who owns every one of those shops and start to network and talk with those people and let them know that
Mm.
you want to buy a wedding cake bakery in Los Angeles.
Mhm.
And most of the people that you talk to are not going to be interested in selling, because a
Mhm.
good, profitable, cash flowing small business is always worth more to the current owner than what someone else is going to be willing
Yes.
to pay for it. Because,
Yes.
the owner knows it, the owner has built it up over time. The owner's situation is very different from the person who might buy it. So
Mhm.
rewind the tape back to the beginning of this conversation. I talked about that seller's discretionary earnings. If
Mhm.
someone builds up a business over time and they don't have a big debt at the bank, then that seller's discretionary earnings, that $200,000, you know, yeah, they've got to pay their income taxes out of that, and they've got to pay to replace equipment out of that. But most of that money is going into their pocket. If
Mhm.
you buy that business and you take a bank loan to buy the business, then you've got that debt service component,
As well.
right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so the numbers literally change. The business is not
Yeah.
as lucrative or valuable to the buyer than it is to the seller. And this is what a lot
Yes.
of sellers just don't get. They don't understand how the performance is going to change once you apply the
Mhm.
the debt to it, and the buyer has to
Mhm.
make that loan payment. And so
Mhm.
that seller, I when I talk to a lot of sellers and I show them what their business is likely going to sell for, a lot of them will simply
Mhm.
say, "Oh my God, I could just keep the business for the next 3 years and I would have that money anyway, and I would still own
Yes.
it." And I say to
Mm-hmm.
them, yeah, you're right.
Yes.
Totally. So keep
Mm.
running it.
Okay. So super interesting, but it's not just businesses. It's everything. It's when people are selling their home. They always, brokers tell me all the time, people just think their homes are worth so much more. You show them the market price, you show them the comps, but no, our home we should be getting, double. Or cars when they're selling a car. When they're selling anything, human beings always think that what they're selling is worth
Yeah.
more for some weird reason. I don't know why.
There's a name to it. That I've seen articles written about this.
Mm.
There's a certain psychology bias that
Mhm.
a term that's been applied to this, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
Right. But then if we were buying it, we want a deal. So we've got to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. That's kind of the first rule. Now, I do know people that build up companies and sell them at a profit, but you're talking about local bakers, and this is like brick and mortar. You're not talking about tech companies that start, build, and then sell at a high profit. That's not what you're talking about.
Well, I'm talking about real cash flowing businesses. So, when you talk about
Mm.
things like tech companies, like
Hmm.
the buyers in these spaces have different points of view of how they look at things. And
Yes.
so
Hmm.
most small businesses change hands because someone is interested in acquiring a cash flow. And they literally ask
Hmm.
themselves, what is it worth for me to buy this cash flow? When you start to talk
Hmm.
about things like software or online things like
Hmm.
software as a service type of businesses,
Hmm.
people will look at that and they'll say, oh, this is fast growing, it's highly leverageable,
Hmm.
or my company already has customers who could use this product. I could then,
Hmm.
offer, if I bought this company, I could offer this service to my existing client base. It's a whole bunch of
Hmm.
other different kinds of things that they're looking at. And they will give these companies what I refer to as a Silicon Valley valuation, which
Hmm.
to me is just nuts because it doesn't ever make sense from a point of view. It's highly
Hmm.
speculative, but
Hmm.
that whole sort of IT online world operates by a
Hmm.
different set of rules because these people are
It's very
not.
different.
Well, it's different in this way. They don't have to justify their decisions to someone like a lender. See, when you go
Hmm.
to a bank to buy a business, a real bank that's
Hmm.
going to give you a real loan, they want to know that you can really repay it,
Hmm.
right? So,
Yes.
so they're going to look at
Yes.
this business, they're going to look at the cash flow. When you get into these high tech Silicon Valley things, there's no banks involved. Banks won't touch it with a
Mm.
10-foot pole because most of those companies aren't making any money. They're just
Mm.
raising funds from investors and they're just acting in a highly speculative way. And if they can
Mhm.
get more hype around what they're doing, then they can hope to exit
Mhm.
to another group of highly, funded speculators.
Mhm.
I don't get involved in
Mhm.
that world. It doesn't really make sense to
Oh,
me.
okay. Okay, I get it. You're talking about pretty much mom and pop shops, right? You're
Well,
talking about
I don't think mom and
more
pop
or less.
shops quite describes it. I call it Main Street and lower mid market businesses, and these are
Yes.
businesses that
Yes.
have a cash flow. What I describe as Main
Mhm.
Street is 500,000 and under, and lower mid
Okay.
market can stretch up into about $1 million of cash flow. So there are some serious businesses in here.
Okay. So these are small businesses up to $1 million in cash flow per year, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So when we break it all down, the profit's probably pretty low with everything because $1 million cash flow, what we just went through, as you said, there's all the costs, there's taxes, there's equipment.
So when I say cash flow, I mean like seller's discretionary earnings or EBITDA. So a million
Mm,
dollar
oh,
cash
okay.
flowing business could have 30 or $40 million in revenue.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Got it. So we're talking about the actual, not revenue. We're talking about the
Yeah.
profits there.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, cool. Now, so people, that's interesting advice. So what you're saying is if you want to buy a certain type of business, start hanging out with people with those particular types of businesses because then they know other people. And if somebody in their group wants to sell, they can say, hey, this guy wants to buy or this person wants to buy this business, talk with them. And then it's really by a referral based sale. And
That's part of it. The
yeah.
other thing is that when people are out there who want to buy a business and they end up on one of these business for sale websites, if you are
Hmm.
just reacting to the things that you see on there, it's almost like a
Hmm.
window shopping kind of idea where you get distracted
Hmm.
by one thing after another. And so if
Mm.
you look at a bakery one week, and then you're looking at a machine shop the next week, and then you're looking
Mm.
at a distributor of health food the next week, what
Mhm.
happens is every time you go down one of those rabbit holes, you have to completely learn a new set of conventions. You have to learn about
Mhm.
a new industry, and
Mhm.
different kinds of businesses are organized in different ways. Even something as simple as the P&L. In some businesses, labor is part of the cost of goods sold. And so it's part of
Mm,
it affects your gross margin. In other industries,
mm-hmm,
labor is part of the overhead. Right. And so
mm,
when you're looking at new and different industries every week, you have to relearn all of this stuff. There's a huge learning curve every time you examine one of these things. Whereas if you stick
mm-hmm,
within one industry, and let's say you start to look at one business after another, you become more of an expert on the industry and how to examine these businesses. And then you also
yes.
start a little collection of financial statements from businesses that are all in the same industry.
Mm-hmm,
And you can actually start to have your own sort of benchmarking data. And
mm-hmm,
if you know that you want to buy a certain kind of business, wedding cakes again, let's use it as an example. Well, then you can start to follow
mm-hmm,
people on social media that are talking about that business. People, there's a lot of different
mm-hmm,
industries where there are creators now talking about how they run their business. You can often find a book on Amazon about that specific industry.
mm-hmm,
Maybe there are trade publications. Back in
mm-hmm,
March, I actually attended a conference. I was invited to come as a speaker, and it was for the wedding industry.
mm-hmm,
And so there were people
mm,
there from photography, DJ services, wedding planning, venue operators,
mm,
like all across the spectrum of companies that are involved in high end weddings. And
mm-hmm,
so if you want to get into that space through baking the cakes, you can start to expose yourself to all that stuff, and you can learn the
mm-hmm,
ecosystem, you can learn how people are marketing themselves, etc. And you become
mm-hmm,
better at looking at those businesses. I'll give you an
mm,
example. I've got a client of mine has acquired several companies within one industry. He's in the language translation space, and so
mm-hmm,
because he knows the space so well, and he's already an operator in that space. Um, when people approach him and say, "Hey, I heard that you've been buying businesses, I might want to retire," and this is another big thing. As soon as
mm-hmm,
you start buying, you develop a reputation as someone who is doing deals. Deals start to appear for
mm,
you because your name gets passed
mm-hmm,
around. He will actually give them a list. He'll say, "I need these 10 things from you. Once you hand them to me, I will tell you within a couple of hours if I'm interested in knowing anything about your business." So he's got this
interesting.
triage list of basic data points that he
Mm,
can look at specific to that industry. And and these
mm-hmm,
kinds of key insights are going to be industry by industry. Like if somebody is going to buy a pizzeria, a really experienced pizzeria operator is going to look at the volume of cheese
mm-hmm,
that the location buys, because that
okay.
one
Mm-hmm.
metric is going to tell them a tremendous amount of information about how many pizzas that this place is selling and what their revenue and
Right.
cost should look like.
Okay, so a point about that. AI is doing a lot in that now. There are AI systems. One of my friends or colleagues is an AI consultant, and he said there's a solution where they film the plates coming in after people have eaten to see how much food is left on the plate, and the AI automatically adjusts how much food they're ordering. It's fascinating that we're seeing that people are only eating two-thirds of their meal. So we're going to make they adjust the size, and then they're actually they're creating less waste. So I'm guessing that AI might be able to analyze once they get these reports. You can run it through AI probably as far as the pizza, the cheese, and all that. Do you know what I mean? I'm sure there's some sort of AI application that would help analyze all of that now,
There are these
right?
tremendously complex AI systems that these really sophisticated business buyers called private equity groups have been using for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Using sort of publicly available Main Street kind of large language models like ChatGPT or Notebook
Mm-hmm.
LM
Mm-hmm.
is something that has just started. People are starting to apply
Mm-hmm.
these tools to look for what the AI can notice and kind of get feedback from
Mm-hmm.
the AI. But I would not leave $1 million purchase decision in the hands of AI for myself. Like I would want to
Mm.
know that the opinion and feedback being created by AI actually made sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm just thinking it could be for the initial thing. Okay, so at some point it will be more reliable. That's for sure. So now I had another friend who does help people buy businesses, and he said there's just this. He said, John, by the way, the rule is this. He said you shouldn't be buying it. What's that ratio? Um, he said there's a magic number that you should not buy a business for over this price regarding what you were just talking about. Do you know, do you have like a ratio as well?
Well, it can vary by industry. And this is another reason
Oh,
why you need to really know what kind of business you're looking for, because different sorts of businesses have
mm,
different rules associated with them.
mhm.
If, for example, I mentioned before about how EBITDA or seller's discretionary earnings doesn't take into account
Yes.
depreciation. So if you were going to buy a
Mm,
trucking company and you were ignoring depreciation, you would be in for a
mhm.
world of pain because those big trucks are expensive and they wear out
Yes.
and they would need to be
Yes.
replaced, right? So that
Mhm.
kind of outlook on that particular industry would completely disarm you, and you wouldn't
Mm,
really be able to negotiate a good deal. And
mhm,
if you go online and say, how do I value a business like X, and we came up with a trucking company,
mhm,
you might read that a multiple of EBIT, which leaves the depreciation cost in, might be a methodology, and is true, but it's only applicable
mhm,
to large companies, because in the world of small
mm,
businesses, we have these different opportunities in the US, for example, for bonus depreciation or accelerated depreciation. So the depreciation number on the financial statements actually doesn't mean anything anyway. It's entirely
mhm.
manipulated by the business owner and their CPA for tax advantages,
Yes.
which
Yes.
means if we're going to examine this business and really make a thoughtful, logical decision, we need to not use that number. What we need to do is find a proxy for the actual cost of replacing the delivery truck in a business, for example.
Yes.
And that might
Absolutely.
mean using a proxy, like finding out what it might cost to lease a replacement truck and then using
Mhm,
that as a stand-in for that depreciation.
mhm.
So so this
Yes.
this is there are a lot of people online creating a lot of really
Mhm.
sort of cotton candy, fluffy content where they're
Yes.
saying,
Mhm,
"Oh, boomers are retiring, and this is the greatest transfer of wealth. And if you don't get on this bandwagon, you're going to miss out on all this money."
mhm,
And what they're trying to do is they're trying to sell you a $10,000 online course, and they're trying to make it
mhm.
seem easy, like, "Oh, you can just buy a business and hire a manager."
Yes.
Right? And
Yes.
it's just not realistic stuff to any degree.
Okay. Now you write books on
Yeah.
this, so you've taken us through, and thank you for that. That was really nitty-gritty, and I loved it because nobody takes us through those numbers, and there's not regarding the industry, it varies. Okay, I'm getting that. Um, Makes sense. So, how do you help people? You help them to find the businesses, or you just say, "Hey, go hobnob with those people," like you just
Yeah,
said?
well, how I specifically work with people, there's a couple of different ways.
Mhm.
So so
Yeah.
number one, if anyone's just curious about this stuff, my YouTube channel, I put out one or two videos every week on these topics, and it's
Mhm.
always answering someone's
Mm.
questions. So if you just want to learn more,
Mhm.
dive in. Um, and then
Right.
I do have some online programs where people can learn on their own and go through
Mhm.
different modules and things, and they're all just a
Mhm.
few $100. It's
Mm.
there's no cost of goods sold for an online program. The same thing gets
Mhm.
sold over and over again. When
Mhm.
people find something that they think, hey, this I believe is a real opportunity, I think this makes sense for me, then you can hire
Yes.
me and my team. We are a consulting agency, and we will look at each
Mhm.
file and we put it through a process that we built up over the course of time. And we do research on past sale transactions of other businesses in a similar industry. And we show you
Mm.
what other people have paid for this kind of business, what sort of offers make
Mhm.
sense, and do they cash
Mhm.
flow or not, and what that looks like. And so
Mhm.
we can actually
Mm.
show someone, here's what this business realistically is worth. And John, um, I don't think you'd be surprised, but we often are showing people why they should offer 40-50% less than what the asking price is, and why
Of course.
nobody can afford to pay the asking price on the business.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then we coach people a little bit on how to navigate through that, because if you show up and offer someone 40% less than their asking price, oftentimes you can upset and insult them. And so
Right. Yes.
there's ways to manage
So you
that.
have to negotiate this. You have to learn to negotiate this and break it to them gently that this isn't going to happen. But so a lot of this is just really negotiation skills,
It is, and it's almost
correct?
negotiating or probing to see if you can in fact make an offer. And
Right. Right.
sometimes the proper decision, if you really like the business and you would like a shot at buying it one day, the
Hmm.
proper decision is to know how to deliver a message of retreat. How, I like
Hmm.
this business. Here are the things I really like about it. I'm not able to
Mhm.
make the numbers work for me. And I know you're looking for someone
Mhm.
who's willing to pay more. And I think you should go and try to find that person. But
Right.
if you
Yes.
can't find that person, and if you are open to an offer that would work for me, then I'd like to talk with you again.
Mhm.
Where people sometimes fall down is they will approach the seller and say, "Look, here's how you calculate the value of a business, and here's how you're wrong." And that doesn't get you anywhere
Mm.
because you're
Mm.
basically telling someone that they are wrong, they made a mistake, that their position isn't
Mhm.
defensible or whatever.
Mhm.
Whereas, as you know, if you say to somebody, when people do that, I feel this way. Well, nobody can argue
Mhm.
that. Nobody can argue how your feelings are,
Mhm.
right? And so when
Mm.
you
Although
approach,
they try.
they can try, but
Yes.
but if I'm telling someone how I feel, it's like I'm the authority of knowing
Mhm.
how I feel. Um, I can
Mhm.
also be the authority of explaining what I need out of a deal. So if I say,
Mm.
look, if I'm going to invest money in buying a business, these are the things that I need to be able to get out of it. I need to be able to take a fair salary for my time in running the business. I need to be able to
Mhm.
pay the banker who's lent me money to buy the business. I need to be able to
Mhm.
pay the tax man who's going to tax the profits out of the business.
Mm.
I
Mhm.
need to be able to replace equipment as it wears out over the next few years. And when you sort of break down those numbers and say, here's, based on all the things I need, here's where I can
Mm.
be as far as a price,
Mhm.
it becomes very
Right.
difficult for someone to argue with that. They could say no.
With fact, because 'cause you've broken down the numbers and they can't say, "No, that's not true." Or they can say, "Well, we're doing this," but yeah, because you have all the relationships and those people might not follow you.
Precisely.
So, basically what I'm getting from this is the brokerage industry is broken, okay, for this,
Well, I don't
right?
think that's fair. Here's the difficulty with the brokerage industry, business brokerage,
Mm.
is that it can
Yes.
take months or a year to get everything put together for a listing. It can then take months
Mhm.
or a year to find the buyer. And then it can take months to actually
Mhm.
have the deal close.
Right, and then it can be 80% are never selling.
So, what that means is that if somebody joins this industry and they're new, by the time they
Mhm.
get their first deal closed or before they get their first deal closed, they could be
Mhm.
starving enough that they leave. And so there's an
Yes.
incredible amount of turnover in this industry because people just can't afford to get to the point where they become
Yeah.
good. And there's a
Mm.
few people usually in every market that are good because they've been around for a long time and they've done a bunch of deals.
Yes.
But that's what makes it difficult is that there are people
Mm.
that are acting in the industry who don't have the background and haven't had the opportunity to do enough deals,
Mhm.
and it in large part it's how things are structured, based on commission.
Mm.
um, now, I
Right.
lived through that because I owned my own brokerage from 2008 to 2011, and I left just because of the crazy cash flow roller coaster associated with being a business broker.
Mhm.
And that's why we do it differently today. So, I mean, we still work with buyers and sellers, but what we do is we break down the
Mhm.
process into steps and we charge for each step. And people move through the
Mhm.
process. They pay us as they go. There's no commission at the end.
Mhm.
But it also
Mm.
means that I enjoy a smooth cash flow for me and my team. And,
Right.
and we don't have
Yes.
that, whole waiting for 6 months to see if a business sells. And if it doesn't, you get nothing. Right.
Okay, but to your point though, if 80% of the deals on those sites aren't good and are never going to sell, or for whatever reason, then we were just looking at maybe 20%. So it doesn't seem viable. Do you ever help people get businesses from those sites, but you're just evaluating them
Yeah,
properly?
it has happened. There are the rare
Mhm.
occasion businesses where the business is highly specialized and literally it's a good
Mhm.
business, but nobody really is interested in looking at it because of what they do precisely.
Right.
That can happen.
Mhm.
Um, you
Okay.
know, when I talk with business brokers, I use a candy store analogy. I always say like if you know people are willing to pay a certain amount for candy, it means that you need to find a
Mhm.
wholesaler that will sell you the candy for less so that you can make a
Yes.
reasonable markup. And for
Mhm.
business brokers, literally businesses that they sell are their inventory. So in order to be
Yes.
successful and make sales, you have to figure out what the buyers will pay for the businesses and then show
Yes.
the sellers why they should accept some amount less than that, the differential with the
Right.
commission, and show the seller this is why people will pay what they pay and this is what you're likely going to get in a transaction. What I find is that a lot of the business brokers will approach the relationship with their seller from the point of view of them serving the interests of the seller. They'll try to be a
Mm-hmm.
fiduciary for the seller
Yes.
under this whole idea of trying to get the highest possible price, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that is um, if you set an expectation in the mind of the seller that's too high for the value of the business,
Mm-hmm.
then it's not going to sell. And as a broker, you're not going to make any
And
money.
then they're upset. But this is the same for people selling their
It is,
houses.
yeah,
Sometimes
absolutely. Yeah.
brokers say, "Oh, we're going to get so much money," because they want the listing, and then they have to slowly convince them, "Well, actually, we can't really get that, even though we said we could." And then so it sounds to me like a large part of this business is just negotiating people's unrealistic ideas
Yeah.
and breaking those down. It's really just an emotional thing, really, because if people were operating in truth, it would be like, okay, we are looking at the numbers here and we understand that there's no way anybody in their right mind would buy this business for what we're asking, because we're asking you to buy a business and then not make money and have a hard life, which is very unreasonable.
Yeah.
So really it's about breaking down unreasonable expectations of the seller,
Business
right?
in all places is done between people, and people
Hmm.
are subject to emotions and hopes and desires and all that other stuff.
Yeah. Especially about selling stuff that they're emotionally attached to, like a business. Okay, that's wonderful. So the way to buy a business is not just go onto some business brokerage site, because now we know what goes on there. I mean, take a look, but it's to talk to people in the industry that you've decided on and really get clear on the one or two types of businesses. I was thinking about this at one point, and I don't think I'm going to do it anymore, but started thinking it'd be better to have a business for me. I don't want a brick and mortar, some sort of service based business where you don't have to have an
Hmm.
office. Because there's the other thing about the brick and mortar, you got to then pay the rent, you got to pay for furniture. There's mold, there's the water cooler, there's people going in there, there's liability. So I realized I don't want any of that, right? Some people like that. That's the whole having a brick and mortar. So people have to decide what it is that's going to suit their lifestyle, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And all kinds of different businesses, even ones that are entirely virtual, like you're describing, are being sold all the
Hmm.
time. And it's
Hmm.
actually interesting because the completely virtual businesses that don't have any kind of limits on where people can live who are employees or where the
Hmm.
customers might be, there's a bigger market for them, right? Because you're competing against
Hmm.
buyers all around the world when you want to buy a business like that, versus that local
Hmm.
business where a buyer may want to actually be in that community, for example. But
Yes.
what
Yes.
COVID has taught us is, a lot of old school brick and mortar businesses, a large part of the staff went home and started working virtually.
Hmm.
And so more and more, I'm
Hmm.
seeing people buying these brick and mortar style businesses and they're operating them, but they don't live in the city.
Virtually.
They're doing it
Yes.
virtually and maybe they go there on a regular
Hmm.
basis, once a month for a day or two or
Right.
something. But people are more open to this idea because they realize, hey, the person that owns it
Hmm.
today actually only goes in the office once a month. I could do that even if I had to
Right.
take a flight to get there, right?
Right. But even if there's no, like, let's look at, I was thinking like a cleaning
Mhm.
business. You don't need an office because the cleaners have their supplies at home. You book them and they go to the place. You wouldn't even need an office at all.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I mean, you might have like one of those mini
Yeah.
storage lockers or something to put stuff in or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Maybe. Or they just all have their own supplies. And that's a local business that has no brick and mortar.
in fact, I knew a guy in Vancouver
Hmm.
actually who was running a maid service
Hmm.
business and he did not have any office or anything like that. He was doing it just like you described. Yeah.
Right. Another one is security, but security has such huge risks because there's handguns and stuff like that. But it is another one, because I met a guy that had a security business and he said, I just want to sell it now because of the liability. Once you have weapons and fights and people, because they're bouncers, there's so much liability of people being injured. But completely there, he said there's no office. It's just everybody just goes to their job. Anyway, well, this was highly interesting. So how many businesses do you own, David?
Right now, well, I just own one.
Mhm. Your coaching business.
Yeah. Well, it's a consulting
Mhm.
business first.
Consulting. Yes.
But
Yes.
yeah, we work on 3 to 4 new files every week, and so
Mhm.
we've been doing this for over 10 years. So we've
Mm.
seen thousands of different businesses, and so if someone comes to us to look at any one particular kind of business, chances are we've seen that industry before several times.
Mhm.
And that's what
Mm,
allows us to cut through these files and to do these
right.
analysis so quickly.
Right. But it's interesting that you're not somebody that buys a bunch of businesses yourself.
Yeah, it is real that if you buy a business, it is going to take some part of your time. And
Mm-hmm.
in my own personal life, I'm a single dad, and so I've
Mm,
got two children that I'm raising, and so
mm-hmm.
there's a limit to how much of my time I'm willing to tie up in
Yes.
overseeing what's going on in different businesses. And if
Mm-hmm.
you buy a business and you're not going to be there every day, if you are going to create the systems and processes for other people to be there, it means that you actually have to develop an entirely different skill set. I call it the regional manager skill set. Your
Yes.
local Exxon station has a manager, but they don't let that person run the business for a year and then submit
Mm-hmm.
financials to head office. There's somebody looking
No.
at what they're doing, kind of observing the numbers, and that's the
Mm-hmm.
skill set you have to develop. And if you
Yes.
are going to do that, you actually need to know the business very well. I've
Mm-hmm.
got a few clients who've successfully done that, but they've always
Mm-hmm.
followed this path, which is they buy the business, learn how to run it themselves from the seller. They're usually in there for 6 to 12 months while they build the
Mm-hmm.
processes, procedures, SOPs, management tools, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can put someone in their place and step back while,
Because they fully understand the
yeah,
business.
because
I
they know
understand.
what's
Yes.
going on.
Yes.
Like if on these business for sale websites, you'll find business listings where it'll say like transmission shop, absentee owner.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm.
what you don't see from the ad is that the owner lives in Florida, but he ran the shop for 20 years.
Yes. Yes. And they just, yeah.
This person can log into the POS system online. They can look at the security footage
Mm-hmm.
online. They
Mm-hmm.
can call their manager and in 20 minutes of talking, know what's going on in the business because they know everything about the
Mm-hmm.
business. And
Yes.
you likely, if you don't know transmissions, you can't buy the business and step into their shoes because you don't understand all the background
No,
stuff.
no, exactly. No, very, very, very true. Well, listen, this has been highly interesting,
Awesome.
and I don't totally get. Well, I'm a single mom, so and I have my coaching business. So we talked about this before, and I thought that's right. I would have to spend the time to, or you buy a business that's running like clockwork and it has a whole management team, and then you just get reported to, but you have to understand the business as well. Okay, well, this has been great. So, what's some philosophy or mindset that you want to leave people with before we close the show?
Yeah. It's just that business is the foundation of all creation, all value creation. If,
Hmm.
you can do something cheaply and effectively for someone else, it makes sense for them to pay you to do it and for you to spend your time doing that thing really well and then paying other people to do the things that you need to have done. And if we all specialize and we all do what we do the most effectively, we all overall become wealthier. And the more
Mm,
business we do with each other, the better off we all are. And so I'm a huge fan of business and business ownership. And I think it's demonstrated itself to be the way that all of us get to live a better life. The poorest people today
mm,
live far better than royalty hundreds of years ago.
100%. We eat sugar every day if we want. In the old days, they got sugar only on certain
It's
occasions.
true. Yeah.
They were healthier, probably. Well, so thank you. And I agree with that. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insight. And thank you, everybody, for watching this. And I'll see you on the next one. And if you liked this, please share, write a review, and turn up again. You're listening to the Business Wealth Impact Podcast, your source for empowering information and cutting edge ideas from the world's top minds. I'm your host, Jeanne Amlour, founder of seven-figure coaching company, Jeanne Amlour International. Join me on a journey to unleash your potential and create your highest success. Welcome to Business Wealth Impact.